I think everybody knows Hovey. I've actually known Hovey for a real long time because he and his wife Marge were good friends of my parents, and I knew all the Brom kids as well. And we used to go up. They had a neighborhood swimming pool, and that was a great thing to do in the summer. And Marge, of course, taught swimming and life saving for years. So we're going to hear about his World War II experience. I suspect he could probably talk about development of ski resorts and skiing in Colorado too, but we'll let him talk about his experience in the European theater in World War II. So here's Hovey Brom.
Billy Bailey is going to help me a little bit on this, and Mason has helped me already with some pictures that we have. And so World War II, I was drafted. I did not volunteer. And so what did the Army get when they got me? Well, I was born and raised in Des Moines, and during the Depression, I was roughly 7 years, 7 and up old, and we had a tough time during the Depression. We lived in 4 houses because we couldn't pay the rents, and every summer I was sent to the Hovey farm up which was in Badger, which was my mother's folks. And so I spent all my summers in Badger. And so I ended up being a summer farmer because I did that clear through college. And so anyway, I graduated from high school in January 28th in 1944. And 6 days later, I had to report to Camp Dodge to join the Army, and you got a physical and shots and all that. And I was a little different than other people because, interestingly enough, when I was in 11th grade, the end of 11th grade, I had a girlfriend, and we went on a hayrack party one night, and actually that was because people were going into the Army. So we were on a hayrack ride. And so going home, I fixed a nice little spot for us in the back of the hayrack and made a little niche for us on the left side. And on our way home, we were hit by always have trouble with this. We were hit with a semi-trailer carrying 200 hogs, and she was thrown out and killed. Got that through. Anyway, I was badly injured. My whole upper body was crushed, and took a while. So when I went into the Army, I was at that point, I was over 6 feet, but I weighed 116 pounds. So I was really a skinny mini coming into the Army. I don't know if they, I almost didn't know whether they'd let me in or not. Anyway, went to basic training. Well, you guys probably know about basic training. The first thing is they make you physically able. You do all kinds of physical stuff. And I, despite being skinny and all, I got along on that all right, except they had about a 10 or 12 foot wood wall to scale in the obstacle course. And I could never get up that wall, but my buddies would always help me. So I always could run the obstacle course because I got some help getting over the wall. The second thing they do is teach you to obey. And if you didn't do something, you got it. You had to either go to KP or 100 push-ups, or you'd be going along and someone would just quietly say, on your belly. And if you weren't on your belly in a half a second, you got chewed and got, so anyway, obedience was the second thing. The third thing was how to kill your fellow man. And that probably took the most time. Most of it was you got a rifle and you got learn how to use it and how to take it apart and put it back together. And then you had target practice, and of course the targets were all human people. Uh, I mean, cardboard, but humans. And you learned that when you're going to shoot a person, you don't aim for the head because it's too hard to do. Hit for the body, just underneath the neck. And then we had can't pull the name out. What do you put on a rifle? Bayonet. We had bayonets. And we were taught how to use a bayonet, and always head for the neck. That's the easiest thing with a bayonet. And so we learned how to kill people. And it's when I tell that or think about that, we did it, and just thought, you wanted to do it the best you could. As a matter of fact, I was the best marksman in my class, and so I got a medal. I've got a medal saying I'm a marksman. Well, after basic training was over, I was in the armored division. All this was taking place in Fort Knox, Kentucky, which was an armored camp, and they had a great big, huge, it looked like a parking lot, and they had all the vehicles that an armored division had: trucks, jeeps, infantry carriers, and tanks. And so we learned how to run and do all of those. Well, not very much, but we knew how to do it. Well, when it was over, I got a license in the armored forces for a Jeep, for 2 trucks, 2 different kinds of trucks, and a tank. And the tank was kind of what everybody hoped that they would get. And so from there, we went down to Fort, a fort in Arkansas, which was an armored forces camp, and it had a huge, there, I think it was like 1,100 acres area. And I got assigned a tank, and I was the driver. And for about 2 months, we went on maneuvers, learning how to do a tank. And you think of a tank as being really, it goes any place, but there's 3 things that, there's the tank I learned to drive in, and there are 3 things that stop a tank. Number 1, the Germans had developed great mines that they buried in the ground, and that would stop a tank and really get it taken care of. Number 2, tanks don't like water. If you come to a good creek or a bridge or something, you need a bridge to go across water. And then the third thing, and this is kind of interesting, would you think about it, tanks are no good in a forest. There are trees and all things around, you can't maneuver. And so so in our maneuvers, we had to be aware of where a tank could go. You could go up or down as steep, you could go sideways. And I have to say, it was fun to drive the tank. And you notice a tank has a cannon on it. And actually when we did it, there were 4 people in a tank, 2 in the driver's area, and then a man who ran the guns, and then the captain of the tank. And so we did that for a long time. Well, we were just about the end of doing this, and I'm guessing that was maybe, it took 2 months time, because they were getting everyone together. We were in a battalion now. We formed a tank battalion, and we got the other people. A battalion, an armored battalion, has infantry, and it has tanks, and it has artillery. It has all the things, but the tanks are the leaders. and we were just about to, actually, it ended up about 3 days when it was a hot day. We were in Arkansas. And it was a hot day in the high 90s and high humidity. And I'd been in a tank all day, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a heat stroke in the tank. And so the next thing I knew, I was back in Fort Knox, Kentucky, in basic training again. Um, uh, and I lost all the buddies that I had with my first basic training, and they ended up going across very shortly after I left. And so luckily I got into basic training in a class that had about half of the time. So I only had to do it twice in half. But would you believe I got another medal for being the top marksman of that class? It was really crazy. When that was over, when that was finished, I went to, instead of to the driving area, I went to just a classroom, and I had 2 or 3 instructors, and they, the whole business of the class was to teach me how the German army works and what they do in certain situations, and to understand the mines, because the mines were the worst things for the tanks, and how they work. And the Teller mine was the German really bad mine. It was about the size of a pie pan, about 2.5, 3 inches deep. And in the center of it, it had something that looked like a spool, and that was the trigger that set off the tank. And if the tank, of course, ran over it, it exploded. But also with that trigger, if the tank went close, the earth, they're so heavy, the earth would move. And if it moved sideways, the tank, the mine would also explode. Anyway, I learned all that. And the next thing I knew, I was went to New York and then to New Jersey, got on a boat, and I was in a boat heading for Europe. All unassigned. I was just a single. Most people go across in a unit, like the unit that I first did. So, and was I seasick? A little bit, but about halfway across, all of a sudden, all the lights go bright red, and the burp, the noise going on, and all of a sudden we could hear depth bombs. We were being attacked by a German sub, and I know how, I've never been in a boat before, big like that, and the boat had to zigzag. Well, a big boat doesn't zigzag very easy, and so it tips to zigzag, sort of like an airplane does. And so here we are, the noise and the red lights flashing and the depth bombs. And I didn't want to drown in the middle of the ocean. That was probably the first time that I really got frightened. And that went on for about 12 hours, and finally it stopped. And incidentally, we were two troop ships and 2 destroyers and another smaller ship that I don't know what it was. In other words, there were 5 ships going. So they had protection for us, and that's of course why the submarine wasn't successful. And wouldn't you know, 2 days later it happened again, and this time only for about 8 hours. And then finally we landed in Europe, and we landed at Le Havre, France. And it was very, very pleasant to get off the boat. And in Le Havre, I immediately got into a truck that took me to Forges-les-Eaux. If any of you know, or it's sort of halfway between Le Havre and Paris. and I was put into they'd taken over a hotel, and I was there, and I was told when I did it to be ready for to go early in the morning. Now, this incidentally was in late December, and at the same time I was coming in, the Battle of the Bulge was going on, and I don't know if you all know about the Battle of the Bulge, but the Germans towards the end of turned out to be towards the end of the war. Decided that because D-Day had gotten us, the Allies were on the coast of the Channel, and we were getting all our supplies in, that the Germans wanted to go through our lines to the Channel and then go both ways. So to stop getting us supplies, to isolate the Allied troops in that. And so they put all their troops that they possibly could there. Of course, they were fighting also a war with the Russians on the other side, coming in the other way, but they put everything they could. Anyway, that's what was going on when I landed. And so they took me back to Le Havre, and we got out, and it was next to a pier, and it had an open space. Well, you could see there was the water and the sand to take the tide that goes up, and then it was an area that was like the size of a football field, 2 football fields end to end, and it was a minefield. Now, the Germans, of course, had mined everything that they thought would be places where the Allies would land. And to supply us, the Allies needed more space at the dock to store supplies. And so they wanted to get rid of this minefield. And so there were 10 of us that were there, and we got out, and this was about, since that was that time of year, it was probably about 8 o'clock when she started coming in, and there had been snow there, but it had melted, and there was brush up about a foot high, and we were to clear the mines out of this minefield. Well, there weren't mine detectors then. There were no such things. So what do? Well, we get on our knees, and we were get about 4 feet apart, and we took the bayonets off our rifles, and we stuck our bayonets in the ground, stuck them in the ground at 60-degree angle, and then went along in front of you like this until everyone was done, and then we went ahead a little bit. The 10 of us went along, and I was the first one. Incidentally, we were at 60 degrees because, of course, if you did perpendicular, it'd take forever to get through. If you did any less, you might hit the top edge of a teller mine and slide over and hit the trigger, and you're gone. So, incidentally, we were told that they knew there were teller mines in that field, and they knew that there were bouncing Betty mines. Well, bouncing Bettys were very interesting. Incidentally, the teller mine was buried about 2 inches in the soil. The bouncing Betty had the top of the mine level with the soil, at least when it was put in, and it was a 2-piece mine. If you triggered it, it would throw up an explosive, what do you take out of your pocket and throw? I don't know. Anyway, it would pick that up, and then it would explode up about 3 or 4 feet, and it would kill everyone within about it had a 10-foot to 15-foot radius. So within 40 feet or 50 feet, it would kill everybody within it. And it was triggered they've had a real thin stainless steel wire like a hair, a little bit bigger than a hair. And they had always 2, sometimes 4 of those from each mine. And then it ran out into the thing about each one was about 20 feet long. And so any infantry, any people who were walking in that mined area would trigger those and be killed. And so we knew all this. And here you are on your hands and knees. It's cold and it's wet. Your bottom of your legs got cold and wet all at the same time, of course. And you're putting it at 60 degrees to catch the and then looking carefully for the wires. Now I didn't find the first wire. Somebody else found the wire. And what you did when you found a wire is you carefully followed it, as making sure you didn't pull till you got to to the mine. And then the captain who was in charge of us had a wire clipper, and so we'd get enough earth off around that carefully and cut the wires so that would deactivate that mine. And I did that for 16 days in a row. Now, you learn very quickly when you're in a war area that time means nothing. You don't fight from 8 to 5 and then take the rest of the time and do it from 8 to 5 again the next day. That goes on. And you don't fight from Monday to Friday, but you fight the whole time. So Saturday and Sunday, the day doesn't make any difference. You have to be alert and fighting. And so this was 16 days I did this in a row. And luckily then you'd come back and you were wet all down below and cold. And we could when we got back, we'd take our clothes off and we'd have clean, dry clothes for the next morning. And then the 17th day, they said, Brom, you're going someplace else. And so I didn't know where, but there was a truck that I got into, and we went about 10 miles or so away from where I was, and got to where the 16 armored division was starting to get together. Now, you got to think about this. 50 tanks, probably at least double that carriers for the infantry, all of the armament for the artillery, how long it takes to get a division together, and that all had to come across by boat. Some of it came from England already, but some of it came directly and then shipped down and put. So it took about a month's time to develop to get the 16th Armored Division ready to be ready to go for armor to be in the war. And I got at this place not a tank this time, but a Jeep. I got a Jeep, and I was made they were made by Willis, and we took no pictures because you didn't have a camera in those days when you were out doing this, but this is exactly the kind of the Jeep I had. And what I was called was a forward observer. And I just happened to have something that tells you what it was. That in the armored division, the forward observer meant going ahead of the front lines into enemy territory to scope out the targets to return with the details and what the targets were and how many there were and what kind of resistance they might have. And they were going to tell what you were going to get from the enemy. And unfortunately, I didn't know then, it had the lowest life expectancy in the division, because you were going out in front and ahead to do that. Well, finally, the tank the division was ready to go, and so we started towards Germany, and we went through France. Reims, for you who know the territory, Reims was one of the cities that we went through, and the Germans were actually still. We hadn't been there to get the Germans out, but when the Germans had the Battle of the Bulge, they took most of the soldiers that they had to put them in that area. So there were very few soldiers, but there were still army people there. And what they did was they did everything they could do to stop us physically, because they didn't have enough ammunition. They didn't have enough. The artillery had all gone some other place, and so they blew up all the bridges that they had. They tried to do everything to the roads, although the roads didn't make any difference. And there's another thing that probably you need to know, is that, of course, when a division like that goes into battle, you don't go tank after tank after tank down a nice road. You go like a vacuum sweeper. Your tanks were side by side, and so more people were on the ground, not on a road or anything like that. And so and that probably would, when we marched forward, that was maybe at least 10 miles from one end to the other, and we had 50 tanks to roll along that were ahead of it. And so if you bollock stuff, it didn't take much thing to bollock things out. So it took us a lot more time than we thought. If a bridge was out and we had a river, what did we do? Well, we had an engineering crew with us, and they made a pontoon bridge. And so we went across the water on pontoons. And they would try and do those. And when they did that, all the tanks would maybe get together into two places to go across and go on again. Well, we got to Germany, and between Germany and France was a line that the Germans had made that nobody could cross. It had concrete pillars in it that were about 6 feet high and pointed on the top and about 5 feet apart. And that was maybe 100 feet at least deep. And then on the other ends, they had machine gun billets around, so that you just couldn't get through those. And those were things that were done based upon World War I, when the line was. But luckily for us, Air Force took care of that. So when we got to that line that we thought we'd have trouble with, we had no problem, because we called for aircraft, and the aircraft bombed in front of us to lay that down, so we could get our. So we walked. So we sort of walked into Germany rather than the fire way in, because that line didn't work. And besides that, now the Germans were kind of mixed up, because they were stopped in the Battle of the Bulge, and they lost a lot of people and a lot of ammunition. And incidentally, the Battle of the Bulge was in a forest area, so tanks couldn't have that. And we had taken our third and fourth divisions, armored divisions, and they'd come around behind the Germans, and it had actually cut off their supply. That's one of the reasons why they didn't get to the coast in that area. Anyway, we're now we're in Germany. And so in France, of course, we were dealing with the people around were friendly. All right, but now we had their enemies. And so I'm in Patton's army, Patton, and for Patton, his point for an army a division to be is that you never stop. The wheels have always got to be turning. You're always going forward. And so we'd come forward. We'd come to a town. A lot of them, incidentally, had been bombed, and and a lot of towns look just like this. This happens to be a picture taken in Munich, where I could take a picture, but the towns that we have, there are more of them who were like this than they were all put together. And what would happen is the tanks would all lead forward, and every town tried to stop us, but they didn't have the ability. They didn't have the fighting power. They didn't have, but I had to go up ahead, always ahead, to figure out where to go and how I thought you could get the tanks through the area. And they block streets in the town. And if you've seen the picture, oh boy, what is it? Saving Private Ryan or some of the picture. There's one of the scenes there is very much shows the streets blocked and tanks coming into it. So every town we have, it didn't have the kind of ammunition or the armament that we had, but of course they had guns, and also what we found out when we got into Germany was the soldiers from the Battle of the Bulge were coming back. And so we started taking prisoners of war. We started taking lots of soldiers. And what is kind of interesting is that our division, the 16th Armored Division, took, are you sitting down? We took 26,000 German prisoners in our walk through Germany. Anyway, each town, oftentimes there'd be soldiers who had been coming back and were there, and we'd capture them. And so we went. This is going through Germany, a country that sort of knew they were defeated, but they didn't want us. They didn't want us to come in. In that area, my luck was I had my front windshield shot off twice. I had my radiator shot off once and lost all water. When I wasn't out front scooping out what was going to be ahead, I oftentimes was behind to direct traffic, sort of like a traffic cop. Because imagine this, you just can't imagine. We had to be supplied. We had to be supplied with petroleum. All these tanks keep 50 or more tanks going, and all the other things, all the petroleum it takes to do that. And that had to come. Anyway, I was back, and we had made a turn that was different, and so I was back directing traffic so that our supplies would come the right places. And I was standing on a sidewalk next to a apartment, actually, and I can still feel it. I can feel the heat and the wind of a bullet that went just right just by my ear, hit the building behind me, and then shattered all the debris from that over me. And I quick course ran to the Jeep, and I had known you get tricky on this sort of thing. I known that if you look at the buildings ahead of you, if the windows are closed, it'd be fairly light. But if the window is open, it's a black spot. And you think about that. And so I knew I should be looking for that, but when I got to my idea, you look up and there's a black spot. I could tell exactly where that shot came from. So I gave him a few back. You never know. You never know what happened. But so we finally got across the border into Czechoslovakia, and it was totally different because now the population wanted you, but the Germans, of course, were in every town. They had occupied Czechoslovakia for 6 years, and our goal at that point was to get to Pilsen, and Pilsen was a town about the size of Des Moines, but the main reason for it, it had one of the largest steel mills in Europe, and the Germans, of course, had taken it over.
Hovey, this is EJ and Annie. We're at our 1 o'clock time, and I know you have a lot more to tell us. Would you be able to do another program next week or finish it up next week?
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, Hovey, if you'd be
You
willing.
really want to hear me again?
Yeah, I could.
Yes.
We do, and I'm sorry that the time has come to this, but before we go, I do want to, on behalf of the Waterloo Rotary Club Board of Directors and myself as the president, I want to present to you the honorary club membership. You have been selected to become an honorary club member of the Waterloo Rotary Club. And so on behalf of the board and myself, I would like to present that to you today and just thank you for your time, your dedication, your service, your songs, everything. And so we really want you to know that we appreciate you.
Thank you. I have appreciated Rotary. Thank you for giving me the company. It should be the other way around. I should be representing you to thank you for letting me join. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we appreciate you very much. And so we'll look forward to next week. And thank you everyone again, as EJ said, for coming today. If you can return next week and bring a friend, that would be fantastic. So
I'll just jump in and say that we do have an interview with Hovey at the Grout as well in our archives.
Oh, fantastic, Billy. Thank you for sharing that.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, Annie.
Bye.
See you, Hovey.
So you can get us through the war and bring us back home, right?
Well, it's kind of crazy to be speaker two Rotary meetings in a row. We never do that. And I'm sorry I spoke so slowly last time that I didn't get through. But one advantage that I have is that I can remember things I forgot to tell you last time. So I'm going to start out with some other things. And incidentally, Billy Bailey and Mason are around here to correct me and to help me out when I need it. And I do have some more pictures. Well, I told you the story about my hayrack ride and my girlfriend being killed. I did that because that had one effect on me that was really tough in the Army, and that was I would go into panic if anything sneaked up behind me or came behind me, and this wasn't just general panic. My hair stood on end, and I'd get stiff, and I'd really, and so the Army didn't know that they were getting a diminished soul when they got me, because I had that problem along. The other thing that I didn't tell you, and I have a hard time doing it, but I need to do it. That is that when we were in Germany, going through Germany, we'd gone a little across the Rhine River, and had excuse me, and had gone on a little beyond. And as I told you before, I was a scout ahead of time, and I had gone out and I came to a prison, and I went a little closer to the prison just because I was afraid maybe that they had um, things to keep us from going beyond or anything. Anyway, there happened to be a road right around it, and I was on that road, and I turned the corner and I looked over and I saw maybe 8 or 10 prisoners in there, and they weren't people. Their eyes were black and their heads were skulled, and they had their fingers up, and it was like a skeleton, and they obviously had been uh, didn't have food. They probably, and it was you can tell I have a hard time explaining it, but that was, and so I quickly went back, and we the 16th Armored got a good crew over there quickly and saved whatever. They were incidentally Poland soldiers that had been captured during the Polish part of the war and were in that camp. Anyway, now, so we've gotten to through Germany, and we've gotten to Czechoslovakia, which is what our goal was. Our goal was to get the Germans out of Czechoslovakia. And when we went through Czechoslovakia, it was much easier because the public, of course, the people were essentially for us. And what the Germans had done is that they had either civilians or military people in each town, and there were maybe one or two to 30 people in each town to keep the town under control. And luckily, as we moved along, oftentimes the Czechs, knowing we were coming, actually captured in a way the Germans that were there and had them for us. In other times, we had to chase them down, but we kept getting prisoners of war. We kept getting prisoners of war, Germans, constantly as we went through Czechoslovakia. Well, the first big town, and then actually the only big town we were at, was Pilsen, and it was coming up. And Pilsen was interesting because it had one of the largest steel mills in Europe, and the Germans had taken it over. Incidentally, they had been in Czechoslovakia for six years when we went through, and the plant was run by Germans, and they had about 7,000 Germans there that were running the plant, and it was putting out all kinds of armament and guns and things like that for the German army. But the protection that had were aircraft guns, because they had been bombed once by our airplanes. But you maybe if you remember or know, we didn't bomb a territory that wasn't Germany because we didn't want to go into other countries and ruin them. So they only had one bomb, and it destroyed about a quarter of the plant, but it was soon built back. It was going full blast when we came, but it was ringed with aircraft guns, and they knew that we were coming far enough ahead that they had gone ahead and taken the aircraft guns which shoot up and had redesigned them so that they would shoot horizontally. And that took a lot of trouble because they were mounted in concrete areas coming up. So anyway, and the Czechs told us that they would be armed. And so we came in, and our armored division, our battalion, was the one that was the point at that time. And what we did is that we sent about 4 tanks coming in, and we got you kind of went over a hill, and then there was the whole plant, and the anti-aircraft guns started coming off, and to a tank they didn't hurt very much, but we realized what they had. And so, long story short, it took 2 days for us to get enough tanks around and come in. And tanks, of course, have the cannons on them, and we'd shoot and try and destroy all the guns that we could find. And finally, after 2 days, the plant threw up a white flag and surrendered to us. And so when we went into there, we captured instantly about 10,000 Germans, because there were more there than normal, because the Russians were coming into Prague before, and a lot of the Germans were coming up into Pilsen to form whatever they could form to keep us the Russians from coming in. So after that, we took maybe like a 12-hour rest, and by that time it was daylight, and we went into Pilsen, and you can't believe what happened. The town exploded. It was like going to a football game and winning the game in the last second with 1 point. You know how the stands stand up and yell. The whole city was on their feet and yelling, and bells were ringing. And as we came in, they threw flowers at us, and they threw loaves of bread, and it took. I was the head of our group, and it took us 4 hours to go through the celebrating Pilsen. And you can't imagine how happy they were. It was wild. It was just, they were 4 deep, and they kept jumping on my Jeep, and they came on the back, and I couldn't do anything about it. And they tried to hug me, and I was driving, and there were cars ahead, and it was just the wildest situation you can imagine, with everybody yelling and crying. And they were so happy to be free of the Germans. Well, knowing Patton, we didn't stop. We went through the town and went about 5 miles beyond before, at that time, we stopped and kind of got ourselves organized, and it was time to go on to Prague. And so immediately, no rest for the wicked. We had to go on immediately and headed for Prague. And so we started our normal things. Well, we were finding that we were finding more German soldiers coming towards us, and but they weren't attacking. We captured them, and what we really found out later is that at this time the Russians were almost to Prague, and a lot of the Germans decided they would excavate Prague because they'd rather be a prisoner of the Allied than be a Russian prisoner. And so actually the German soldiers were actually exiting from Prague. But the Russians still hadn't taken over Prague, so we kept going on and on. And about, maybe 3 days after we'd gone through Pilsen, I was going ahead, and I got to a point where over a hill, I could see the spires of Prague. because Prague, is a beautiful, beautiful old city with lots of uh, uh, buildings that are really gems. And so I turned around to go back to tell my bosses what they would find as we came along. And when I got back, I couldn't believe what was happening. The 16th Army had turned around while we were out, and they were retreating. They were going backwards. And so what well, no, that was the orders that the 16th Armored Division was to go no further, and they were to back up, and to take a whole division, and you're talking about thousands of vehicles and 45,000 men, to turn them around and go backwards. It was utter chaos, but we did it. And the reason was that Eisenhower and Stalin had gotten together, and they had drawn a line between Prague and Pilsen that was to be Russian on one side and the Allies on the other. And we had gone beyond that line. And so we had to retreat back. Actually, we retreated probably back about 20 miles or so, and finally got that. And as we were retreating, all of a sudden, Russian soldiers started coming up, and they were almost our enemies because they were trying to push us back. Now, I need to tell you about the Russian army. You probably know that the Russian army had no supply. They lived off the land, everything they had. So the soldiers that were coming looked like a riot group, not a soldier. There's no uniforms. They came actually in groups of about 30 to 40, with one person who was directing them, because that's the way they were organized. And they would come, and they would come up to right up to us with their guns and tell us in Russian, which we couldn't understand, that we were in their territory. And so they were pushing us back. Well, we finally got back to the point and stopped, and more Russian troops started coming. And we stopped, and so the next thing I knew, I was called to battalion headquarters, and they introduced me to a Russian general and two of his aides, and they said that me and my Jeep were to take the Russian generals and the aides wherever they wanted to go. Now they were taking things from us. It was very interesting. And so for a full day, I took that Russian general and his aides, and we went along where the line was, where it was, and changed someplace where people were. And it was very interesting because the Roman groups of 30 to 40 were like rioters. They had you could see no organization, but they had guns, and their guns were very interesting. I'll tell you about that later. But when we came, and when the general got out of the car or out of the Jeep, all of a sudden, chunk, everybody stood at attention and saluted, and they changed 180 degrees when the general came back. And the general would go into the house that they'd taken over at that time and spend maybe 15 minutes there, and then come back out in the car. And so we went for about 60, we went clear to the German and Poland border along there. And each time we hit a group of Russian soldiers, they had the same thing. They probably were a house, and the general went in the house. And incidentally, while the general was in the house and talking, then all of a sudden, all these people came to my Jeep, and and you couldn't understand a word. I know they didn't speak English for some reason or other, and they're chattering away, and they always did this. They thought that their guns were much better than ours, because they were. The Russians, the gun that we had, you know, a normal rifle over our shoulder. The Russians had a rifle, but it was a machine gun, and so it was really more like a machine gun than it was a rifle. And they'd point at mine and say, oh, and they'd look at theirs, and they'd shoot some up in the air to show me how good their, and everywhere we stopped, that happened. They were so proud of their deal, and thought we had such terrible guns. But the Jeep was very interesting to them. I had to raise the hood in a few places, and they came around, but I was only there in each group for probably 15 minutes at the most. Well, anyway, we got to the border, and then we turned around and came back. And as we came back, the Russian was checking what was happening. And what was happening is that the Roman army now, instead of being in groups, they started being one by one, kind of along where the border was. Now, this is a border with nothing to show. I mean, it wasn't a road, it wasn't a river, it was just going through farmland, and it was weird. But anyway, as we came back, we started to see Russians lining up sort of along that line. Well, we got back to where we started, but then we went south, and we went south to the border of Czechoslovakia. Again, not so many troops were there, but we stopped always at somebody's house that the Russians had taken over, that the general would go in. And we got back, and we got back just about, well, the sun had set. And we drove into the battalion headquarters, and they came out. And by that time, the battalion headquarters had set up their own tent. It was a reasonably large tent. And the Russian general and the two aides got out, and they went in there, and they didn't say goodbye. Incidentally, they never talked to me because, well, they couldn't. But they had their business. Okay, the next morning when we woke up, all of a sudden things were different. The Russians stopped all the transportation between the Russian side and the American side. They wouldn't let anyone go through. Well, this is something we because before that, a little bit, actually, roughly probably 2 days, there was intercourse back and forth. But now the Russians stopped all that. And of course, there weren't too many people around because that had just happened. But each day it kept worse, and we all of a sudden were getting people that were leaving Prague and wanting to come to Pilsen, or leaving Pilsen and wanting to come to Prague. And we were freeing the Russians. We were freeing the Czechoslovak people. We were freeing, but we learned the Russians were conquering Czechoslovakia at that time. They were taking it over. So you had two different armies, the goal of two different armies together. And it was, each day got worse and worse, got more people and more people on the board. And all the Russians had, of course, was their guns, but their machine guns were terrible. If somebody was getting out of line, they'd go with their machine guns and run a bullets in front of their toes and keep them back. So they had a very excellent defense with their men and their guns. Well, one day I had the general, the next day I was told to go to Prague because there were some airmen there that had been hidden by the Czechs during the war, and now they had probably bailed out or a plane had crashed, and the Czechoslovakian people had protected them for as long as they were there, but they were there and wanted to come back. So I drove. Now, well, first place, I had a hard time getting across the border, and it took some brass to get me across the Russians border at that time. And so then I drove to Prague, and we were to meet at the bridge. And Billy, what's the famous bridge in Prague that has the statues across of it? I can't remember the name of it, but you see it in all history books, and
I bet there's travelers who know that better than I do.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I got to Prague. Of course, Prague's a huge city, and I had a hard time figuring out how to get. But I got to the river, and I knew the bridge was on the river, so I kind of followed that. Anyway, I finally got to the bridge, and lo and behold, as soon as I got there, the people were there, and they waved at me. Yeah, there it is. There it is. Oh, that's it. And they were standing on. I didn't ever cross. I was standing on my side, and they came over, and there were two, and they spoke English. Hooray! And they had about 4 people with them that had secret kept them for. I think they had kept him for 2.5 years. And there was crying and hugging and all kinds of stuff. And so we got the 2 in, and I drove back to the new line now between the Russians and the Americans. And I couldn't get across the border. Now they wouldn't let me. And they probably would have let me, but the 2 I had, of course, they were in civilian clothes, and they wouldn't let them across. But luckily, they realized that they spoke English, and finally I got across and got them around. Well, very next day I was sent out again because we had found that there were a pair that were in Poland, close to the Czech border, and they gave me a map, and I looked at it, and of course the map was in Czech, and all the signs were in Czech, and roads, of course, aren't all crisscross like they are around here, but they're all around, and then anyway, I'm making a long story short. I finally got to Poland and got in and found the town I was supposed to get. Now at this town, it was very interesting because I went in down what was sort of their main street. There maybe were 30 or 40 people there, and the 2 Americans, and they were saying goodbye to the Americans, and the whole town was sort of crying and hugging them, and then because not only had the people that they stayed with hidden them for a year or more, but the whole town actually had come together. And so anyway, I got them, and we went back, and again the same problem getting through again. And so that board, it was a terrible psychological place to be. The Russians were wouldn't let a soul by, and we were freeing the Czechoslovakians from that, so they could be free. Anyway, while this was happening, I happened to find a brochure, a little thing that said that they were going to start an army band, and they were having auditions in Munich, and they gave the dates, and it was the dates, and I thought, boy, I want to get out. I'll get out of here. Anything, and I played trombone, and trombone I'd played in the Roosevelt High School band, so I should be good enough for the Army band. Anyway, I got permission from my officers to go, and luckily, just luckily, there was a truck that was going to go to Munich to pick up some supplies and come back, and so I thought, well, should I take my backpack, my things? And so every soldier has a big pack that everything he owns is there, and it's easy to take. You put it under your arm, and you go, and you got everything you own. Anyway, I did take that and went to Munich, and we got in there. Well, not late, but I knew it was at the radio station. That was what the paper had said, and they said there's a big spire that you couldn't miss it. And luckily that sort of worked. We had a hard time, but Munich was about 40% destroyed in the war, and so streets would be blocked and you couldn't get around. Anyway, I finally got there. So at 2:00 in the afternoon, they put a trombone in my hand and some music in front of me. And now I hadn't played a trombone for over 2 years, and it takes a pretty good lip to play a trombone. And they had music up ahead, and I tooted, and I didn't get through the piece that they put in front of me. And they said, well, you made arrangements to go back to your outfit? And I said, yeah, the truck is going to come by at about 4:00 here. And I'm sitting there terribly disappointed. And I heard them talking, and they couldn't believe it. They were just thrilled at who they'd found, but they hadn't found a string bass player yet. Well, in the Roosevelt High School band concert, every once in a while there was a part for a string bass, and I was drum major, and so I was a good friend of our band director, and he had taught me how to tune a bass, how to tune the strings, and how to play maybe 4 or 5 notes, because that's all you needed to play for that. So I had twice I had played a string bass for one of the pieces in the band concert that we had. So I said, I can play string bass. And so wouldn't you know, my phone is ringing. Okay. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and I say playing string, and they came over and they say, you can play string bass, and I said yes, and they said, well, we're sorry, but we couldn't find a string bass to audition to play. Then they talked to me about a little bit more, and then they talked, and then they said, well, you're in. Have you got your stuff? And I said, I've got my stuff. And so I went back to where I was sitting, put it under my elbow hand there, walked through a door, and my life changed 100%. I went through there, and after waiting a while, I got into a truck that they took me, and we were at the radio station, and they took me not very far away from the radio station into an apartment that still looked fine. They took me up to second floor into a room and said, this is going to be your room. And actually my partner was there, and his name was Tony. And so Tony welcomed me in, and I went in, and it was a two-room apartment. It was one big room that had a kitchenette and a couch you could sit on, and then a bedroom. And I and there was a closet in the bedroom. And so he told me to go, and I went in the bedroom, and I looked, and there was linen on the cots. There were sheets. I was going to sleep for 3 months. I had slept in my Jeep or something. I couldn't believe it. So anyway, I went around back, and it was just about supper time. And so there was a dining room down below the apartment. We went down to the first floor into the dining room, and there were the soldiers there that were there, and they fed us, and we had dishes, and they were ceramic, and I couldn't believe it. It was a 180-degree hour and a half switch. You couldn't believe it. Anyway, and we got to talking, but the more we got to talking, the more concerned I got, because they would ask me what, well, they were talking to themselves, and they had played with, well, the Miller Band and the all the bands that I had listened to on the radio, and all of a sudden, it dawned on me, though nobody said, this wasn't an army band like I thought. It was an entertainment band. This was like you would have a USO band. And it was totally different than anything I thought. And so I began to switch down and talk much less and listen to them. And they couldn't believe, it was interesting, they couldn't believe that they were going to be a band together, because it said in America, you never could get people that talented together. There wasn't enough money. But here they were pulling them around all. And incidentally, thinking about people in Germany at that time, there were 1,400,000 American soldiers waiting to go home. And so the Army was putting together an entertainment band, so there would be some things that could happen that way. Well, I couldn't believe it. And so unfortunately, eventually a base came, and I started it came about noon, and I had that afternoon and evening before I had to be at band practice. And this band practice was at 9 o'clock every morning. And so I carried this in. I got up into my place in a big, now a 17-piece dance band is what it was. And we were on risers, and I was up on the upper riser with the drummer and the piano player and the string bass, which were the rhythm section of an entertainment band. And so we're up there, and the George, who was our leader, starts us out. So he goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they play the first 8 measures of a piece, and he stops them, and he says, "Brom, what in the world are you doing up there?" And so I was caught. I was caught, and all these beautiful musicians, top musicians in America, and here I am. Well, time goes by. Take a long story short, first thing that happened, I got blisters all over my hands because I didn't have any calluses, and then I put Band-Aids over those, and then they had to put Band-Aids over the Band-Aids. Well, eventually, and there's no music to buy, so we had our own arrangers, and the arrangers took my bass music and made it easier to play, and eventually, probably 6 weeks or so after my hands finally healed and I began to be able to play on the string, I became a musician in an entertainment band. And the 2 things to say about that deal. It was grueling. we got up in the morning, had breakfast, practiced at 9 o'clock to 11, had an hour, and then had to have a program that was usually extraneous, that was over the radio, the American Forces Radio Network, a half an hour program that we played. And when that was over, we'd try and get some lunch and get into a bus, and we'd go out into the German area where the American troops were. And everywhere you went in Germany, there was a wonderful auditorium to play in. It was really fun. They weren't very big, but of course we didn't go unless they had a nice auditorium to play. Actually, one of them we played they said was over 400 years old. And so we were, and okay, anyway, so we'd play a 4 o'clock concert to an audience of 400 to maybe 1,000 people who happened to be stationed in hotels around there waiting to go home. And we'd have an hour and a half to 2 hour program. And we'd do one at 4, and then we'd eat and do another program at 6, or at 7. And then by about 10 o'clock, we were ready to get in the trucks again and go back to Munich. And we'd get back to Munich like at 1 o'clock, or well, if we were close, and up the next morning at 9 o'clock. And that went over and over and over again. But we were the best band in the world, without any question. We had all these wonderful, Stoichi, I can remember him particularly because he was our lead trumpet player, and he could play a trumpet like you never have heard before. And he had 3 trumpets eventually. Incidentally, getting instruments was a little difficult in the beginning, but I did that for a year, and I found out that there's nothing more thrilling than to do a concert and to have the audience afterwards stand up and clap, and you bow, and you get a thrill up and down your spine that you just can't believe for doing that. And so I know why entertainers want to do that. It's wonderful. Well, then it's time to go home. I did that for 1 full year, and it was my time. And now, if you could show me my train, we went from train to actually Le Havre, and with one deal, and you know, you were so glad to go, so glad to get home, but you couldn't believe it. And so, Mason, are we finding my train picture? Oh no, well, let me stop here. We got into there we go, and this is what we wrote on the side of our. We were so glad to head for home. We got to Le Havre, and we had to line up to get on the ship that was going to take us, and it wasn't a liner like you would think about. It was the ship was a cargo ship that they had fixed up so that you would take it, and this is our line waiting to get onto that cargo ship, and every piece of person you see there is so happy to be going home. It was really crazy. You could see ships going up the gangplank up there, and then the picture of the how we lived. It was we slept in the hole down at the bottom of the boat in cots like this, and this is what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 6 cots high, and you see you see our toilets here, the garbage cans, because there wasn't any. But we took that and we got home, and the most thrilling thing was going into New York Harbor. And unfortunately, it was kind of foggy when we went, but you went by the Statue of Liberty. wow, you could believe how that got to it. We got into New York. The Army was got us quickly. I ended up in Madison, Wisconsin, was discharged and got home. And this was about mid-May. And if you remember from my talk before, I had worked on the farm as a hired hand in the summer. I was home in Des Moines for a couple days, but they needed me on the farm, and I went on the farm and was a hired hand and said, that was great. It's a new part of life. I'm going to forget what's that. And so I really I never joined a veterans unit, and I did forget all that kind of stuff. And what got me started to even thinking about this was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and I got thinking, maybe I really should think about that. And so you've had to sit through, unfortunately, my recollection of being in the Army. It was wonderful to get home, and it's God bless America.
Yeah.
Hovey, that was wonderful. I'm sure everybody could give you a good round of applause and then some. Art's advised us, I think that we're just about out of time. So we wanted to thank you. And this has been recorded. So I know if you've seen it, you can watch it again. And I hope we can share it with many others in the club that weren't able to make it. So thank you very much again. And I'll let Annie bring up anything else if she wants for the good of the order.
Hovey, I just want to say thank you. Thank
No,
you for sharing that. That was a lot to dig up.
I want to say thank you for letting me get this off my chest.
Yeah.
It's really been, well, thank you.
Well, I hope it's been sort of healing too, because you held on to a lot of things. And so I really appreciate you just letting it out and you choosing us as a safe place to do that. So thank you very much for that and for all of your service. So I think everyone agrees with that and appreciates. So I mean, I wish we were together. We would actually have a roaring round of applause and maybe even a hug or two. So anyway, thank you.